Hey, composing gloves here. I'm wearing a hat. Today we're going to be talking about the Haas Effect. Let me really quick show you the Haas Effect, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing. So this is the Haas Effect. I have a delay plugin here, and I have a harmonic plugin here. We'll talk about this setup a little more in just a sec. I'm going to turn the delay off. This is the sound I have. It's this sort of transient pluck sound. Now I'm going to turn it on, dude, man, bro, and watch out. You would expect with a delay plugin to hear a delay like dun, 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 dun. Well, let's listen. Nope. And if you listen, our sounds actually changed if I turn it on and off. And then that's oh wow, well what is going on? That is the Haas Effect. And there are rules about this, and there are a whole number of really advanced topics we could get into, and I'm going to get into a little bit. We're going to talk about equal loudness contours. We're going to talk about real-time timbre change based on spatial position, something headphones cannot do, but monitors can. Unless you're like running and your headphones are bouncing around on your head or something. But let's talk about what's going on. So the Haas Effect is sort of like masking. If you remember the masking video, it is when a sound happens, an initial sound, and then there is a delay. So let's say this is our initial sound, some time passes, and then bang, here's where our delay sounds. Like it bounced off a wall and came back to us, and we hear our delay. It's a specular delay, which meaning we can tell that it was a copy of the original sound, and we hear it, and we could tell that this sound happened and this sound happened. But let's say that the sound happened, the delay happens this fast. You do not hear it anymore. Well, I haven't given you any sort of like meter to judge what the distances mean. But basically, as our delay gets closer and closer, our brain will merge the sounds into one sound. And what will happen is they'll actually comb filter each other because the phases will overlap and then they'll sum together, and some frequencies will cancel and others won't. If you remember the videos earlier in this series where we talk about stuff like that, which I can't remember the actual title of the video, which is why I'm not saying it, but there's a video where I talk about how when they cancel, when they cross over each other, they don't always perfectly cancel in a spectrum. And what that means is we will get a different timbral change based on our delay. It gets really crazy as soon as we throw speakers into this, and we're also ignoring feedback. We're going to throw feedback into this in a little bit. Now I'm using because feedback is basically like you continuously delaying it by that amount of time, and that creates some very interesting things, and it's also a delay specific thing. It's where multi-tap delays can really begin to present interesting things, especially, and delays, they'll start throwing at you all sorts of stuff. Sometimes the tools are so powerful it's scary. Like Fruity has a multi-tap delay. I forgot what it was called. I did a video series on it. It's a delay bank, the Fruity delay bank. Yeah, that thing's crazy too. Okay, so I'm using this one because it gives me a millisecond readout. That's the only reason I'm using this one. Well, that and this is a killer one, but I know that a lot of you guys probably don't have it, but it's just giving us a millisecond readout. And like I said, we're going to move over to another delay to show you some functions and features of real-time spatial timbral change. That's when I say spatial, it depends on where you are, will actually change the timbre, which is why if you have headphones on and you're moving around, your headphones go with you. So you can't have that with headphones on unless you're like moving your headphones around. So delay, when we have this, what we've got a really transient sound, right? Really transient sounds, if they're delayed and generally, this is a general rule, under 20 milliseconds is the point where it's merged and it sounds like one sound. So if we increase this to 2 or 3 milliseconds, what happens in that range for transient sounds? So we're talking about like really, really fast sounds. Those sounds will they'll gain the benefit of timbral change. So you'll actually affect the spectrum of the sound. And so you could try moving this around to get different timbres. So if I play and move up. Now here, some sounds will break down around 10 milliseconds. I've seen various things written on various pages on the internet. I've read a couple books on mixing and a couple classes, and everyone seems to have a different number. The most common one by far is 20, but 10 seems to pop up quite a bit. And I feel like I can sort of tell a difference between this and 10, but it's hard to tell because there's that part where the attack smears as it separates from the original. And so it's in that little range that you're like, is that a separate sound or is that the same sound? And then, but as we get up to 20, see, that's really obvious, like do. So that is the Haas effect for that. Now let's say that for more complex waveforms, this effect will extend all the way back to 80 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, sometimes even farther. Just depends on the waveform. So this is a really, really fast waveform, right? And we're going to talk about the implications of sending it through at different volumes too, because that's also a really interesting thing. And this is all important for mixing and for just understanding what you're listening to. What does it sound? What kind of reverb are you listening to? Is it actually a delay or is it a reverb? It gets kind of hard to tell occasionally. I just noticed that they don't have a pre-delay on here. Okay, so let's I've never thought about that before. I'm sure there's one on here somewhere. I've not looked for it before though. Okay, so now let's talk about a longer sound, a less transient sound. So we're gonna make a longer sound. Done. And so let's turn this off and just listen to it. So this is our sound now. Oh, I'm also gonna turn this down because it gets kind of So there's our sound, right? Now let's go back. We see our delay still at 22 milliseconds. Can you hear a distinct delay where you have two sounds? Or will we get that comb filtering effect? Now this brings in a number of interesting things because the volume fades in and the spectrum comes in, which means as you turn the volume up or down on anything, you are also making a sort of filter move. And volume knobs occasionally try to fix this. If you remember the equal loudness contours, we are very sensitive to the 3.5 kilohertz range, around that area, and the highs and the lows tend to go away. So whenever we fade a sound in, the bass will appear as the sound gets louder, and the higher frequencies will too. And then it'll go away, and so we're basically, it's like the mids will pop out more. Now, some volume knobs actually try to fix this. There are various, like you'll see loudness buttons that will apply a curve, an EQ curve, to try and change the amplitude of those to make the spectrum sound more even at softer volumes. So you want to be aware that whenever you're fading the volume of something up and down and you're using just a common all-pass filter, you're going to have that funness going on. So what we're going to do with this delay is as we turn our volume up, the spectrum will actually fill up and it will cause the timbre of the sound to change, especially in the Haas Effect range. Now that's really because the Haas Effect range, because that's changing the summing of the frequencies as things get louder. Not only do we become more sensitive and aware of it, but they're summing differently. They're more aggressively summing and subtracting. And so we get very different sounds when we send something through soft versus loud. So let's talk about, I'll show you that in a second a little more clearly, but let's go back to this longer. So we have this long thing and we can't hear a difference, but we hear the comb filtering effect. And the way a sound changes after its initial, it started, basically. This doesn't really have a transient, but after a sound is initiated, that's called flux. And so it's the way a sound changes afterwards. And so if we play, now I can't hear any sort of difference. So let's go up to 50 milliseconds. Can you hear a distinct delay now? But you notice the way it sums changes and you hear that sort of resonancy, wah, like that, wah. I don't know. Let me play it one more time. Listen to the end. You will hear the change, that frequency shifts because of the equal loudness contour that I was talking about take place. And so you can actually hear a little bit of higher ring. So it's a very interesting deal. Now the notes also present an interesting puzzle because the frequencies, depending on the note you play, that generates a different spectrum with different emphasis on what spectrums we're using. So if we're using like a really low note, the high harmonic content will be substantially different than if we're using a really high note because the ratio changes. Ideally, it all just shifts up, but as we go down, there's more low frequency, so it's more susceptible to this. And really high notes are also susceptible to this volume. They're more susceptible to volume changes like that. So it's kind of an interesting deal. So now let's talk about, let's get, so 50 wasn't it. Let's go up to 100 and 4.8. Nope. Let's go up. Let's go to 171. It's getting closer. I can hear something now going on. Let's go to 218. Ooh. I might call it there. Let's go up to 200. I'm holding control to get finer values. Let's go to 261. Oh, okay. Yeah, there we go. It's right around there. It's still pretty tough though. If we want a really clear delay, we'll have to go up to like 400. Do you hear it? If we go back down to like 87. No dice. So around the 300, 250 is where it really starts to go down. So anyways, that's the idea. And what's nice about this is this using a delay instead of a reverb plugin, this is only one delay too. So our feedback is all the way down. And that means that we'll only have that initial delay. People use this for things like slapback and stuff, but this isn't a mixing thing. We're talking about the Haas effect. But anyways, you can get a very clean sound by using a delay instead of a reverb. And depending on the waveform you send through there, it will behave differently. Now, we're going to talk about, so we've talked about the volume thing. Let's talk about stereo more or less. So at this point, I'm going to leave this delay plugin, but you understand that like transient sounds shorter, they break down. The Haas effect, it's also called the precedence effect or the law of the first wave front. I believe that's what it's called. That effect breaks down at different times depending on the waveform. That's the big takeaway. Now let's start combining it. So we've talked about the implications of volume. Let's talk about that just a little bit more. So we're going to make a transient sound again. So here we have our transient sound. I play it through. You see there's a delay. And you also notice that this first area has a ton of potential for creating different sounding timbres because they sum together differently. Now let's move this up and let's go to like 6. And let's change the volume and see what happens. In fact, let me keep the volume consistent. So we have a same velocity every single time. We'll play this. Oh, my typing keyboard's on. Okay. And now let's change the volume. So just listen as we go. Let's change the delay time. You hear how most of the mids are the only thing really popping through. You don't hear. Now, there's no low end on this sound, but the high definitely goes away. So we're right there. You can hear the two distinct sounds now. So anyways, now let's go. So that's just a demonstration of the thing I was talking about. Now let's throw stereo into the mix. We're still not going to deal with feedback. We need to deal with initial delays first. So I'm going to turn this plugin off and add a fruity delay plugin. This is a very simple plugin. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn the volume off, and we actually have the option. The other plugin allowed us to do this too, to filter it afterwards. And I might touch on that, but that's like going even further. So I've taken this timing. Now this is a stepwise timing. So this readout over here is in steps. It's not in milliseconds, which makes it confusing, which is why I didn't use it. But we have here the ability to create several different types of delay. We have an inverted delay feedback mode, and then we have a ping pong delay. We're going to mostly concern ourselves with the ping pong delay. What this means is when we send a sound into a delay, we're going to use the Haas effect to do some really interesting things in stereo. It can get pretty confusing. So when we send a sound through our speakers, we have it come out and if we were to pan it, it would sound, we would use a stereo cue. We talked about these. We would use an interaural timing difference or intensity difference to tell where a sound is. With delay, ideally, it should be solely intensity, right? But again, we talked about that our acoustic space can augment the way this occurs. But when we're wearing headphones, ideally, this is the way it is. So we have this concept of, okay, our direct sound is going to hit us, and we've panned it over here. Now, the pan law in FL will actually increase the volume on one side and decrease the volume on the other. And so, at least last time I looked at it, that's what was going on. They may have changed it with one of the updates. I don't think so. I don't think they touch stuff like that, though. So, again, anyways, as we hear it, it's going to hit us, and it's going to sound like it's over there because this is slightly louder, which in other DAWs, this could be different. Your pan log could be for a volume-based change where it just cuts one speaker instead of increasing the other. So there's different pan laws. So this may change for you the way your delay may behave. So it's coming out over here because I've panned it this way. This speaker actually increases a little bit in volume. This one decreases a little bit. And as we hear the direct sound and then we hear a delay, and what we can do is we can tell it to say, hey, when the sound sounds like it's over there, ping pong it against. So it's like a game of ping pong. It goes to this side and it goes back to that side on the delays. So so this is the normal mode. And you see it sounds very heavily like it's on this side. Now let's do ping pong. And you see that Haas effect, because this delay, this ping pong happens at the rate at which, and this plugin at least, it happens at the rate at which we set with our feedback, with our timing control over here. What happens is we hear the direct sound, and then the delay ping pongs to the other side of the image, and so we hear it come from over there. And then depending on the initial volume of that first delay, which is set by the input volume, or whatever this plugin is doing to it. You also have a feedback volume, which is a different thing. Anyways, you hear it go over there at the Haas effect rate, so we get this sense of space now. Now let's talk about how we can use this a little more crazy-like. So we've got the panning figured out. Now let's introduce, and we understand this. Now let's introduce a stereo offset. So let's go to normal. And so right now it's mono, so our sound comes out both speakers at the same time. And we have this stereo offset ability, so we're able to set it off. And this one's conveniently in milliseconds. I wish there was a way to change between the two so you could see this in milliseconds. Then this would have been fine for my demonstration. But let's go to 3 milliseconds. So what's going to happen is we know that 3 milliseconds is well within the Haas effect range. So a sound's we're going to hear the direct sound, and then the delay is going to be offset to I believe it's to the left. So the left is going to sound 3 milliseconds before the right on the delay. And so we're introducing now a sort of a phase shift in addition to a timing change. So that's going to mess itself up. But in addition to this, we're also going to have, if in your acoustic space, now I'm wearing headphones, but in acoustic space, you'll also have the space interact with this. So there'll be an acoustic phasing going on, which is going to go on anyways, and then it's going to hit you. So basically, you're going to have a phase sort of variation here to give you another sense of space, but you'll get another level of sort of a comb filtering effect. So if we play this, so that's what ends up going on. If we go the other way, let's go, we'll put a 15 millisecond to the right. So don't worry too much about like all these complicated details. Just know that we're getting a phase is now playing a role in this, and we're getting basically 2 Haas effects. The one that hits us, and right now it's only one because there's one delay. I've kind of been talking like as if we've had multiple, but now let's add multiple. And this is in mono. Now if we do ping pong, this thing's going to jump back and forth on every delay, but it only matters if we turn this up because that sounds the same as that. It is slightly different because the initial delay jumps across because we have our direct sound and then it jumps. But let's turn up our volume on our feedback. So now the feedback is gonna send us several delays. So as it jumps through, it's gonna delay it repeatedly. And what's gonna happen is we get this back and forth motion, and every time we have this delay, we're going to get this sort of phase randomness, and we're going to get more of a reverby type effect than we are a delay effect. But in the Haas effect territory, because that's like if the delays were like spanned out, right? But in Haas effects, we're just going to end up getting crazy comb filtering effects. So if we turn this up, now let's do ping pong. And you get that sort of metallic sound. That's what people talk about, that they don't like that sound. Now let's, analog delays like spring reverbs and other things that could be utilized as this sort of delay, they actually have mechanical motions that have to go through. So there's a mechanical device that must respond. And because of that, it changes how, because it must respond, they don't typically create sounds quite like this. Digital has a sort of specific sound to it. Now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce a stereo offset. So now we've got this stereo offset, and it's being ping-ponged across, and we've got our initial sound coming at us. And ideally, throughout this whole situation, it should have just been us just hearing the sound. By the way, because we have the stereo offset, we don't need this pan technically. I did before it was we could tell where a sound sort of was based on that delay, but because so much is happening, our brain just sort of freaks out and says it's coming from we perceive a space instead. And so let's play that. Now let's go to inverted and normal. So you see normal, it gives you the least sense of space. It sounds like you're sort of in a dead room. Now, this is really interesting. So ideally, the only change was in timing, right? But we know that secretly there's also an amplitude change happening. Except for with the stereo offset, if we use this option, I don't believe there is a amplitude change. If you use panning, though, there definitely will be. And that gives it stereo information to be able to handle these different feedback modes. Now, because it's only a timing change, whenever you walk around in a room, you should hear, one side will hit you at a different time than the other. Now, of course, the room will also give you amplitude changes as well. But ignoring that, that means that wherever you are in a room, the timbre will literally change because you'll get a different comb filtering effect based on where you are in the room. So if you want to make a really cool sound that depends on where you're standing in the room to hear it, this is how you do that. But if you're wearing headphones, that's not going to happen because wherever you go, the headphones go to the same place. And so unless you're like juggling around on your head, juggling around or something, then that won't occur to you. So it's a really sort of an interesting deal that is going on there. And of course, we now know. So now we can start combining things, right? We now know that we have the option to create this effect. We know that we have the option of this sort of phase randomizing to give us more of a sense of space. We know that based on our timing in the Haas effect, along with our stereo modes, we can create timbre changes in really interesting dynamic ways. We also have our stereo offset that we could use in addition to I think I just said that, besides the fact that we could use panning to put them in the different modes, which is an interesting option. And we also have the option for, besides the sense of space, there was one more. Oh yeah, you have your initial delay, your one-time delay, which you heard what that sounds like. But let's look at this, how this will affect a longer tones, because I've been using mostly transient tones here. So it's just really, really sort of an interesting deal, and you get way more spaciness. Now let's talk about one other thing. We have this cutoff filter. It's a very common thing. In the other plugin, we also have a filter that we can use. And what this basically, you can use this instead of a reverb because it's a sort of a one-time hit. You could take down the volume of your feedback to reduce the initial impact of that hit. But the cutoff allows you to change the way the entire signal sums. Now in the Haas Effect territory, because this is a Haas Effect video, not a mixing video, but in the mixing context, if you take off the high end, we know that sound air tends to absorb a lot of high end, so it'll sound further away. So we can enhance the way our reverb sounds, or a delay, technically it's a delay, but let's say we're trying to make a reverby type sound. We can make it sound further away by dampening that high end. And so this cutoff is really handy dandy for that. It doesn't tell you what kind of filter, but you just sort of intuitively know that it's going to be a low pass filter. So yeah, just so you know, I don't know why I just assumed that. I've never even questioned that before. Okay, so let's talk about, so we have this filter deal, and it's a very common thing that people will let you do. They'll let you, now this one gives you the option for the low and high, so you can tune your delays, and they even have a second delay. So we can now add in multi-tap delays, which like the Fruity Delay Bank allows you to do. And we get really wild and add in different filters. We could do granular delays, which takes a sample of it. It's more of a creative endeavor with those. And that's more of a sound design tool than anything. But now you can sort of understand when you're listening to a delay, what's going on, how this works. There's not really much else to say about this. The Haas Effect is a beast. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.